When we talk about male sexual desire, people are quick to reduce it to something purely physical, as if it's all just biology, instinct, or hormones. But that's not the full story. What often goes unnoticed is that male desire, at its core, is deeply tied to something far more vulnerable, the need for emotional validation. For many men, sex becomes a way to feel seen, valued, and affirmed. It's not just about the act, it's about what the act symbolizes. Imagine a man who's had a long week, who's been dealing with pressure at work, perhaps feeling invisible in his social circle, disconnected from purpose. He might not even be aware of how emotionally depleted he is. But in that moment, when he feels desired, when someone looks at him with interest, touches him with warmth, and version of me, or engages him intimately, he doesn't just feel physically wanted. He feels important. He feels like he matters. That moment validates him in a way that words or accomplishments often don't. This is why it's dangerous to talk about male desire in purely mechanical terms, because when we do, we overlook the emotional subtext driving so much of it. We start to believe that all men are just hungry for sex, when in truth, many are craving connection and don't know how else to ask for it. Version of me. This isn't about excusing bad behavior or romanticizing every desire. It's about understanding what's really happening beneath the surface. A lot of men aren't taught how to express vulnerability, how to ask to be held, or how to admit they need comfort. For some, sex becomes the only socially acceptable route to intimacy. It's the one place they feel they can let go, be touched, be close, happy version of me, and not be judged for it. So they pursue that experience not because they're shallow or insatiable, but because it gives them a sense of emotional security they might not even realize they're chasing. Happy version of me. And here's where it becomes even more interesting. The desire for sex is often less about the climax and more about the presence of another person. The feeling of someone leaning in, saying, "You matter," not in words, but in touch, in eye contact, in attention. That's what makes someone feel desired, not just physically, but as a person. So when we look at male sexual desire only through the lens of physicality, we misunderstand it. We miss the loneliness it often conceals. Version of me, the need to be chosen, the hope to be seen as more than enough. This truth isn't about weakness. It's about humanity. When we start to view male desire through a more compassionate, nuanced lens, we open the door to real connection, not just for men, but for anyone trying to love and understand them. From a young age, boys are taught a very narrow script when it comes to expressing emotions. Vulnerability is discouraged, tenderness is often mocked, emotional expression is labeled as weakness. So where does that leave men when they grow up? Many find that the only socially acceptable way to express intimacy, closeness, or even emotional need is through sex. Not be version of me, not because that's what they're wired for, but because that's what they've been trained to believe is safe. Think about it. When was the last time you heard a man openly say, "I need to feel loved," or "I want to feel close to someone emotionally"? It's rare, not because the need isn't there, be version of me, but because he's been conditioned to suppress it. In place of that expression, sex becomes the default language. It's of me. It's the one area where he's permitted to seek connection without fear of being labeled too soft, too emotional, or too needy. Sex becomes the emotional translator. A man may not know how to say, "I feel lonely," but he might initiate sex to fill that void. He might not ask to be held, but he might seek physical intimacy because in that moment, it offers the closeness he longs for but can't verbalize. It's not just about desire. It's about reaching out for something deeper, something human. And that part is often missed entirely when people talk about male sexuality. We often make the mistake of thinking that men want sex and women want connection. But that's a myth. Happy version of me. Men want connection too. They just haven't been given the tools or the permission to seek it in ways that aren't sexual. So over time, their emotional wiring gets tangled. They begin to equate sex with validation, affection, love, even worth. That P version of me, when that becomes the only way they know to experience intimacy, the line between physical and emotional connection blurs. Happy version of me. And here's the difficult truth: many men don't even realize this is happening. They don't sit around thinking, I'm using sex to express emotions I'm afraid to show. It operates beneath the surface, influencing their behavior without them fully understanding why. That's why it's so important not to judge male desire at face value. Be version of, because what looks like lust may actually be a disguised cry for closeness. This conditioning doesn't just affect men. It affects the people who love them too. It creates confusion, distance, unversion of me, and unmet needs on both sides. That's why understanding this truth matters. Because when we start to see sexual desire not as a one-dimensional hunger, compy version of me, but as a complex emotional expression shaped by social expectations, we begin to bridge the gap. We open space for healthier conversations, deeper intimacy, and a more balanced way of connecting. Not just physically, but emotionally too. Version of me. There's this persistent narrative floating around that men are all about the chase, that they thrive on the pursuit, that their attraction peaks when something is just out of reach. But the truth is, for many men, the deepest emotional charge doesn't from the act of chasing, it comes from being chosen. Yes, desire plays a role in attraction, but the desire to be desired runs just as deep, if not deeper, than the desire to pursue. We often underestimate how powerful it is for a man to feel wanted, not just sexually, but genuinely, emotionally, and wholeheartedly. Version of me. There's something deeply affirming about being looked at with interest, being touched with intention, being spoken to like you're more than a convenience or a fallback. When a man feels that someone truly wants a him, happy version of me, not just what he provides or represents, it hits something primal. It tells him that he is enough as he is. Most men have experienced being expected to initiate, to lead, to prove, to earn affection. It becomes a pattern, constantly showing up. Happy version of me, constantly trying to be impressive, constantly putting on a performance of strength or confidence. Happy version of me. But when someone flips that script, when someone looks him in the eye and makes it clear that he is the one they desire, version of me, without conditions, it reaches straight through the performance and speaks to something real. This is why sexual desire can carry so much emotional weight for men. It's not just about physical gratification, it's about version of me, it's about recognition. That moment when someone actively wants him, it makes him feel seen, validated, even loved. Happy version of me. And that's a big part of why rejection or even emotional indifference can sting so much. It doesn't just deny him access to an experience, version of me. It denies him access to a feeling of worth that he may not have learned to find in any other way. BP version of me. Being desired answers a quiet question that so many men carry around with, am I good enough? Would someone choose me just as I am? And when the answer feels like, yes, it doesn't just satisfy a craving. It meets a core emotional need that often goes unspoken. But here's where it gets complicated. Because men are so often cast in the role of initiator, the need to be desired can feel like something they're not allowed to admit. It can feel weak or needy to say, I want to feel wanted too. So instead, they wait in silence. They continue to give, to pursue, to prove. While inside, happy version of me, there's this growing itch for someone to simply turn around and say, I choose you. When we recognize this truth, everything changes. Relationships become less about performance and more about presence. Desire stops being a one-way street, instead becomes a shared experience, one where both people feel seen, valued, and chosen. And in that space, intimacy becomes real, not just physical, but emotional, mutual, and deeply human. For many men, sex isn't just about pleasure, it becomes an escape. On the surface, it might seem like a physical craving, a simple biological urge. But underneath, it often serves as a temporary relief from the pressures, stresses, version of me. an emotional weight that don't always know how to process or express. In a world where vulnerability is often discouraged, where emotional expression can be misinterpreted as weakness, sex becomes a space where men can momentarily let go. Not just physically version me, but mentally and emotionally. It's important to realize that this escape doesn't always come from a place of indulgence. Sometimes it comes from pain. A man might seek out sex not because he's full of desire, but because he's full of tension, doubt, insecurity, version of me, or even sadness. It becomes a coping mechanism, a quick release, not just physical energy, but of emotional buildup. Version of me. In that moment of closeness, he might finally feel something other than pressure. He might finally feel alive, connected, version of me, or even momentarily free from the expectations that weigh him down. This isn't always conscious. Most men don't walk around saying, I'm going to use sex to avoid my emotions today. But the pattern reveals itself over time. When work feels meaningless, when relationships feel distant, when stress becomes constant and numbing, the desire for intimacy grows. Not just for the pleasure it offers, but for the escape it provides. Version of me. It becomes a doorway out of whatever emotional discomfort they can't quite put into words. Happy version of me. And because it can offer that temporary relief, many men return to it like a familiar medicine. But just like any form of escape, it doesn't fix what's underneath. It just masks it. After the moment passes, the stress, the emptiness, of me or the loneliness often returns. That's why sex, when used purely as a way to numb version and leave someone feeling even more disconnected afterward. It's a paradox. Version of me. The thing that makes them feel momentarily whole can also deepen the feeling of emptiness if there's no emotional connection tied to it. Nappy version of me. That's not to say there's anything wrong with wanting pleasure or passion. It's natural. But when sex becomes the only space where a man feels safe to experience intimacy, comfort, or release, it places an emotional burden on something that's meant to be shared, not used. That's me. That's why understanding this part of male desire is crucial. Version of me. It's not about labeling it as unhealthy. It's about recognizing when the act is being used to fill emotional gaps that haven't been acknowledged. When we create space for men to express stress, anxiety, or loneliness in ways that aren't tied to sex, version of me, we take some of that weight off their shoulders. We give them a chance to be human first, just sexual beings trying to manage invisible emotional battles. And in doing that, we allow for intimacy that's not about escape, but about connection, real, honest, and healing. There's this widespread belief that men are always ready for sex, that they want it constantly, without pause, without variation, without exception. And it's not just a stereotype, it's an expectation, one that a lot of men feel they have to live up to, whether it reflects their true feelings or not. But the truth is, male libido isn't a constant. It fluctuates, changes with life circumstances, emotional state, stress levels, and confidence, just like it does for anyone else. The problem is when a man doesn't feel that sexual drive, he often starts questioning himself. Society has taught him that a real man should be hungry for sex at all times, and if he's not, something must be wrong with him. Happy version of me. Maybe he's broken. Maybe he's less masculine. Maybe his partner will think he's no longer attracted to them. So instead of being honest about his internal state, he may hide it, perform around it, or worse, carry the silent shame of thinking he's somehow failing. But no one's libido lives in a vacuum. If a man is overwhelmed at work, if he's if he's carrying the stress of providing, if he's disconnected from his partner emotionally, or if he's feeling down about himself, those things matter. Desire doesn't exist in isolation. It's tied to confidence, connection, and emotional safety. And when any of those areas are out of alignment, desire takes a hit. Not because he's not man enough, version of me, but because he's human. What makes this even more challenging is that men aren't often encouraged to talk about this openly. If a man says he's not in the mood, it's met with confusion, or worse, suspicion. People wonder what's wrong. Is he cheating? Is he hiding something? Rarely does anyone ask, version me, are you okay? Or, is something on your mind? The assumption is always about dysfunction, never about emotional context. That version me. And that makes men retreat even further into silence. It's time to change that. Just like anyone else, happy version of me. Men deserve the freedom to ebb and flow in their desire without judgment. They deserve the space to say, version of me, I'm not feeling it right now, without having their identity questioned. Because when we normalize that version of me, we create room for healthier communication and we remove the performance pressure that often distorts real intimacy. Version of me. And here's what's even more important. When a man feels safe enough to be honest about his emotional and sexual state, connection becomes more authentic. Intimacy stops being performative and starts being real. That's when desire becomes less about meeting an expectation and more about engaging from a place of presence, and where both people are attuned to each other. So no, not all men want sex all the time, and that's not a problem to fix. That's a reality to accept and understand, because in that understanding lies the foundation for deeper connection, version of a far more meaningful experience of love and desire. Happy version of me. Men often carry a quiet longing for depth in their intimate relationships, something far beyond physical closeness. They want to be known. They want to be understood. They version of me. They want to be able to show their emotional side without it being seen as weakness or something that makes them less masculine, the version of me. But the truth is, many men are afraid to go to that level because they don't feel safe doing so. The version of real fear that if they reveal their deeper emotional needs, they'll be rejected, judged, or seen as too much. This fear doesn't come from nowhere. It's built on years of subtle conditioning. Being told to toughen up, torpy version, not cry, not about feelings. Boys grow into men who internalize the idea that emotional vulnerability is risky. So even though they crave intimacy beyond sex, they hesitate, they hold back, because the emotional stakes feel higher than the physical ones. If someone turns you down sexually, it stings. But if someone turns away when you open your heart, it cuts deeper. That's why for many men, sex becomes a safer form of connection. It's physical, it's familiar, happy version of me. And it doesn't require the same level of emotional exposure. It gives them a moment of closeness without having to fully open up. But deep down, what many are really yearning for is to be fully accepted. For someone to see their fears, their doubts, their softness, and not pull away. They want to feel like they can bring all of themselves into a relationship. Happy version of me. Not just the parts they've been taught are acceptable. Even in relationships where love exists, men can still struggle with revealing what's under the surface. They might appear distant or guarded, not because they don't care, happy version of me, but because they don't want to risk being emotionally vulnerable if they're unsure how it will be received. The truth is, version of me. A lot of men don't know how to express what they feel because they've never had the space to practice. So the desire for connection stays trapped inside, surfacing only in indirect ways, through sex, humor, withdrawal, or silence. Version of me. What makes this even more complicated is that many partners genuinely want to connect on a deeper level, bappy version of me, but don't realize the emotional risk the man is weighing in silence. Version of me. That's why understanding this fear and making space for it can change everything. Version of when someone creates an environment of emotional safety where a man doesn't feel like he has to perform, fix, or impress, he starts to open up. He starts to trust, and that's when intimacy shifts from something physical to something profoundly emotional. Dappy version of me. Men don't fear death because they don't want it. They fear it because they don't know if they'll still be accepted once they're fully seen. When that fear is met with compassion instead of criticism, desire evolves. It becomes a bridge, not just to pleasure, but to closeness, trust, and lasting connection. That's the part of male desire people rarely talk about, but it's the part that matters most.